Part writing is one of the most difficult things to do in music theory. And so what is actually part writing? Well, part writing is chorale style writing, and we usually practice it as Baroque style part writing. That means we imagine the chorales of Johann Sebastian Bach, late Baroque, so first half of the 18th century. And so in those chorales we have a melody, and then we have three other parts below. So we have soprano, alto, tenor, bass structure. The soprano carries the melody and the rest the harmony. And although it seems that we have a homophonic structure, we also have polyphonic features. So homophonic structure means we have a melody with accompaniment, but the polyphonic feature actually is between the soprano and the bass line. And that's why when we do part writing, it's very important that if the melody is given, we write the bass line next at the same time as figuring out the harmonic progression, and to make sure that the soprano and bass are in a good counterpoint. And that's why practicing species counterpoint is so important in preparation of part writing, because species counterpoint helps us understand the features of part writing, the features of writing a good counterpoint. A good counterpoint means as independent musical lines as possible. So we usually achieve that by a lot of contrary motion and very little similar or parallel motion. Now, I already wrote a melody down here. I made it up in preparation for this, and we can actually review of what makes a good melody. A good melody, of course, implies the tonality. In this case, it is in C major. It starts and ends in C. It goes primarily conjunct. That means by step. There are very little leaps. Here's a leap, here's a leap, and here are a couple leaps, but most of the motion, or most of the succession from one note to the next is a step. So that means it's primarily conjunct. A good melody also has one single focal point. Not that means the highest note is there only once. So how does it sound? So our task now is to part write this out. And as I said earlier, we will next write the bass line that is in good counterpoint to the soprano. And while writing the bass line, we will also figure out the harmonic progression. And then we will fill in the inner voices last. Many teachers emphasize the rules very much. Of course, rules are important. I like to emphasize the rules less, but do a very strict error detection. And I will demonstrate this, how I do this. So after we have written something, we'll do some error detection. Of course, what we want to avoid is parallel fifths and parallel octaves. We want to make sure that the chords are spelled correctly, that each member of the triad is present, and if we have a seventh chord, we may omit the fifth. And with regard to doublings, the very last one chord may actually triple the root and have 1/3, but we want to avoid doubling the third in primary triads, which are 1, 4, and 5. So those are the most important rules. If there is a seventh chord, the seventh of a seventh chord must resolve down by step. So those are very important rules. But we will actually try to find them doing a very systematic error detection at the end. Now, when we write a piece in a tonal key, that means major or minor, we need to establish the tonality. That means we have to end start and end the key on 1. So we can already write here, and we of course need to include the name of the key. We are in C major, we start on a 1 chord. Now the soprano goes down, so if we write a good counterpoint, then we can actually go up with the soprano, and in fact we can create one of the possible secondary second inversion triads. In this case it is a passing 6/4 chord, so we will create a dominant here where the fifth of the chord is in the bass, and you have a passing motion. So we go from 1 to 4, 5 6 4 to 1 6, and it sounds like. So how could we continue? One of the strategies is whenever there is a note in the soprano, that note could be the root or the third or the fifth, and if we allow seventh chords, then also the seventh of a chord. But if it's a seventh of the chord, it must go down by step. So this note could not be a seventh. One of these notes could be a seventh because they go down by step. So in this case, the D could be the root, then it would be a 2 chord. It could be the third of the chord, then it would be Roman 7, which of course is a diminished triad and should therefore come in first inversion. So 2 chord is a possibility, a Roman 7 is a possibility, or the D could be the fifth of the chord, in which case it is a Roman 5. Now we have already established our key here, and it would be nice to go to a predominant chord. So if we have, if we go to a 2 chord, then we could possibly, we could either go in either direction, either up, in which case we go in parallel 6, or in which case the 2 chord would be in first inversion, or we could go down. So it depends on what comes after, and we may actually have to delete, erase something if we run into problems later on. So now the E could be, if it's the root, then it's a Roman 3. But we cannot have a Roman 3 after Roman 2, so we have to watch out for the harmonic progression. If it's the third of the chord, that's a 1 chord, but we cannot have a 1 chord after a 2. If it's the fifth of the chord, then it's Roman 6, but we cannot have a Roman 6 after a 2 chord, because we can only have root movements of third down, fifth down, or second up. So in fact, we just realized that although we wanted to go to a predominant chord, this would be difficult on how we would succeed. So in this case, let's try perhaps the 7 diminished 6. So a first inversion triad as a Roman 7, so has the D in the bass, and it has the D in the soprano, and in fact for diminished triad the best note to double is the third of the chord, which is the D. So it's a B chord, B, D, F, and D is doubled. Now after a Roman 7 we want to have a tonic chord, so we could go back to 1. We can possibly go to 4 here, maybe even 4 in first inversion if we go down to the A, since we have the F. So F could be harmonized with a 4 chord or with a 2 chord, or with Roman 7 again, but we had Roman 7 here earlier. The 2 chord is very restrictive because it's at the end of the predominant progression. So after a 2 chord we could only have a dominant functioning chord, so it's better to go to Roman 4. Now we have the dominant tone in the soprano, which of course can be harmonized with Roman 5 if it's the root, with Roman 3 if it's the third, or with Roman 1 if it's the fifth of the chord. We cannot really go to 1 after 4. Well, we can if we put the 1 in first inversion, and maybe that is an option, but we would have to change our bass here. We could also go to 5, and looking ahead, this E could be harmonized with Roman 3, Roman 1, or Roman 6. So if we're actually going to 5, I will write this a little lower so I have more space here. Then we can have G here, and we could go to Roman 6 here. And we do want to have a contrary motion. Whenever we go from 5 to 6, we want the upper voices to go in contrary motion to the bass, to avoid parallels. Now the A here can be harmonized as Roman 6, or it can be harmonized as Roman 4, or if it's the fifth of the chord, Roman 2. After 6 we can have both Roman 4 and Roman 2, so this would work. Now we came here from Roman 4 earlier. If we were to include Roman 2, now this is actually a mistake, and I will explain why, but let me write this down, because it's in the process of writing we frequently make mistakes, and the question is, how could we identify mistakes? So before we write too much more, we should actually do an error detection. And what I do as an error detection is calculating the interval between the bass note and the soprano note, and then so always calculating the interval. And if I say twice octave in a row or fifth in a row, we have parallel octaves or parallel fifths, and maybe some other mistakes. So anyways, here we have an octave, we have a sixth, an octave approached by contrary motion, a third, a sixth, an octave approached by contrary motion, a fifth approached by contrary motion, and a fifth. So I said fifth and fifth, which means we do have parallel fifths here. And so fortunately we didn't write the whole thing out yet, and we did some error detection already, so we need to actually change this. Now can we put the 2 chord in first inversion? Oh, I did not mean to erase this note. We could put the 2 chord in first inversion. We can try that. It would lead us pretty low here in the bass. The good thing is we go in contrary motion, which creates a better counterpoint, but we have to be wary also of the voice range. So if it's a professionally trained bass, of course they will get the F, but if you're singing with your high school choir, sometimes you may have a hard time finding a bass that actually goes as low. But we will allow it here. So 2 chord and first inversion. Maybe after a 2 chord we go to a dominant, again 5, and perhaps we go to 5 5/7 after that, this being the 7th of the chord. The 7th of the chord needs to resolve down by step, so 5/7 would be G, B, D, F, F the 7th of the chord, and it does resolve down by step here, so this is a possibility, and we can go to 1 and I was just thinking if we should include a cadential 6/4 chord, but with a given melody, that would not be so easy to do, but we could create a 5 chord twice in a row, or we go from 7 diminished 6 to 5/7, to 1. So now we did our error detection here earlier. From octave we went to a 5th, to a 3rd, to an octave, to a 7th, to a 3rd, to an octave in contrary motion, to an octave. I said octave twice in a row, and I realized that is another mistake. Now this is not called parallel octaves, it's called consecutive octaves by contrary motion, and we want to avoid that just as we want to avoid parallel octaves. So our idea of going from 7 diminished 6 to 5/7 does not work very well. If, let's say, we don't want to change the melody since it was given, although it was given by me, I could possibly change it, but if I don't want to, we surely have to change this. Now we could include Roman 7 as a 7th chord, 7 half diminished 7, in which case we would have B in the bass. So it would be spelled B, D, F, A. We would have to make sure to have all 4 notes and to resolve the A down by step, because that's the 7th of the chord. Let's see how that works. I'm not so sure yet if it will work out, but to continue our error detection, I always take a step back. Here a 3rd, going to a 3rd, going to an octave in contrary motion, going to an octave in contrary motion. Again, we have consecutive perfect octaves by contrary motion. We do not want to do that. So we may want to change this perhaps keep B here and have 5, 6, 5. So then we have 3rd, we have 6th, and we have an octave. So at least our soprano bass counterpoint does not have any parallels in it, but let's hear how it sounds. it actually sounds quite nice. We do have a lot of contrary motion. Here we have contrary motion, and at the very end we have contrary motion. So the more contrary motion, the more independent the two voices. So it actually created a nice counterpoint. And we have done our error detection. We should always do the error detection just by identifying the interval to see if we find parallels. We need to make sure that the bass note matches with the chord and the inversion symbol. We can go through here again. Roman 7, that's a B chord in first inversion, that's correct. C 4 chord, it's an F chord in first inversion, has the A in the bass. 5 has G, 6 has A. A 2 chord in first inversion has F in the bass, G, G, C, B, so that's a B7 chord in root position. A G chord in first inversion has the B and the 1 chord. So our notes, both in the soprano and in the bass line, match what we have with our Roman numerals. Now, is it absolutely set? No, it's not, because we may run into problems when we write out the inner voices, when we part write the inner voices. So we'll have to see, possibly we will have to make some changes. Now, we now write the alto into the G clef and the tenor into the F clef. Here, to space this out nicely, it might be good to voice it like this. And so what is very important is, whenever I write a chord, I want to make sure that I have all 3 notes of the triad, and I want to see which of the notes I double. Now, in primary chords, Roman 1, 4, and 5, I do not want to double the third, because it weakens the harmonic appearance of a chord. So I want to watch out for. Anyways, a 1 chord is spelled C, E, G, so I have C, C, E, and G. So the root is doubled. Whenever the next chord has shares notes with the previous chord, like the 5 chord shares the G, then we try to keep the same note in the same voice. And so whenever possible, keep the same note in the same voice. A 5 chord is supposed to be spelled G, B, D. So we have G, B, and D. And we may double the 5th, which is preferred, because it's a second inversion triad, but we may also double the root of the chord. In this case, we try to create as small of an interval as possible. The nature of altos and tenors is that they are kind of boring to sing. They sometimes have repeated notes, or they have relatively small intervals. So if I go down to D, which means I double the 5th of the chord, then it is the smallest possible interval. Going to 1/6, it is a C chord, C, E, G. Okay, I keep the C, I keep the G here again in the tenor. I surely don't want to do that too often. So I want to make sure that if I repeat a note, I don't repeat it more than twice, so not more than 3 times in a row. But C, E, G, and now I can really write any note, except I don't want to double the third, so I should not write an E here, because I already have an E. So let me go to the note below here, below the D, goes also stepwise, is a C. So I have C, C, E, G. I double the root of the chord. Roman 7 is a B chord, B, D, F. I already have 2 Ds, which is preferred in a diminished triad, to double the third of the chord, but I do need 1 B and I need 1 F. So if I go in small intervals, I would have to go down to the B. However, that would create a spacing error because I don't want to, the upper adjacent voices should never be more than one octave apart from each other. So that means going down to B here is not a good idea because I would have a spacing error. So let me put the B instead into the tenor, leaping up here and leaping up to the F. Okay? So before I get too far, I want to do my systematic error detection, which is basically the same as I did between soprano and bass before, where I identify the intervals, but I do it with all the other voice combinations. So I do it with soprano and alto, with soprano and tenor. I already did with soprano and bass. I do it with the alto to the tenor, the alto to the bass, and the tenor to the bass. Those are all the voice combination, and I always identify the interval. So here going, this is a sixth, going to a sixth, going to an octave, that's in contrary motion, going to a sixth. So far so good. Tenor soprano is a fourth, third, fourth, third. So far so good. Tenor alto, a sixth, going to a fifth, going to a fourth, going to a fifth, approaching a fifth. Now this happened to be the tritone, a diminished fifth, which is fine. Of course, that is the nature of having Roman 7. So it looks like there is no error, but I also play through it so far so I know how it sounds, because sometimes it looks good on paper but it doesn't sound good, so we do want to have a good sound. And it sounds fine so far. Now we want to resolve this dominant functioning leading tone chord to a one chord C, E, G. If we go in smaller steps, we go to G here and to C here. So we have C, C, E, G. We double the root of the chord. We're going to a four chord. We need F, A, C. We already have F. We have A. We need a C, and we should not double the A, which is the third of the chord, because we don't want to double the third of the chord in primary chords. So we don't have a C yet, but the C was previously here in the tenor. We want to keep the same note in the same voice, if at all possible. It reduces the chance of having parallels or any kind of other errors. So now we have F, A, C, and the shortest distance to this G is F. So we have F, F, A, C. We double the root of this chord. A five chord is supposed to be G, B, D. We already have two G's. The closest note to C is B, G, B, D. For the D we have to leap down a third here. And let's go one more, and then we do our error detection. A. So this is a Roman 6, so it's supposed to be A, C, E. We already have A, we have an E. Here the closest note to B would be C, and the closest note to D would be C. Now, that is the third of the chord. In fact, in a Roman 6, especially coming from 5, it is preferred to double the third, the C, in Roman 6, and it automatically avoids parallels. But now we stopped here with our error detection. So let's pick up here. So we have a sixth going to a sixth, going to an octave, going to a fourth. Well, it's an octave in the fourth, going to a third. So far, so good. Tenor, soprano, third, third, fourth, sixth, third. Soprano bass we already did at the very beginning. Tenor alto, fifth. In this case, it's a diminished fifth. Fifth. So fifth, fifth, but this is a diminished fifth going to a perfect fifth. And that is allowed as long as it doesn't involve the bass. And it does not, it's in the inner voices. Going to a fourth, going to a third, going to a unison. Okay, we need to also watch out that we don't have any crossed voices, or overlapping voices for that matter. Anyways, sixth, octave, third, third, third. So it looks good so far. If I play this from the beginning, it sounds like. So the problem I had was actually I couldn't reach with my fingers, and I have relatively large hands, which means I must have spacing errors. Now the bass can actually be more than an octave away from the tenor, from the adjacent voice. So bass and tenor can be more than an octave away, but tenor cannot be more than an octave away from alto, and alto cannot be more than an octave away from the soprano. So what I just realized while playing through, when I had a hard time reaching the 10th between the D and the G, is that we have a spacing error here and then another spacing error here. So we need to get rid of that. So I will delete these two notes. And go back to the drawing board. Here we needed a G chord, G, B, D. Now I put the D here earlier in the alto, but we really need to go higher. And that creates a problem. And the problem it creates is if I can go up to D here in the tenor, but then I can't really leap up to B in the alto from F to B, because that would be an augmented fourth, and we want to avoid horizontal augmented intervals. That means an augmented interval from one note to the next in the same voice we want to avoid. So what can we do? So if I were to make this a 5/7, then I could leave the F here, then I would have G, B, or G, G, B, D is missing, and F. Now in a 5/7 chord, in a 7th chord, we may omit the 5th of the chord, and that is permissible. So we actually got rid of the spacing error in this case, but this is the 7th of the chord now, the F, and it must resolve down by step. So we'll have to see, the A chord should be A, C, E, E. In this case, we double the 5th of the chord, and we have to make sure that we don't have parallels, because we don't double the 3rd. That automatically would avoid some problems. But so we started making changes from here. So let's go a step back. So we have an octave going to a 9th, going to an octave, okay? A fourth going to a sixth, going to a third, that's fine. I already did soprano bass at the beginning, tenor alto, a fourth to a fifth, which is a diminished fifth, and it's approached by oblique motion and then resolved inward to a third, which is fine. Bass, alto, a sixth, going to a seventh, going to a fifth, and bass tenor, third, it's an octave in the third, we'll just call it a third, and a third, and that is fine. Now at least I still have to have a wide grip here when I have the tenths in my left hand, but in my right hand I should not have a problem grabbing the chord. So let me play it one more time from the beginning. So this is it so far, and it actually sounds quite nice. So we will continue. The 2 chord is a D chord, D, F, A. We have an F, we already have an A. We don't have a D yet. Now the soprano leaps up here, and we do want to avoid those spacing errors. So if I were to leap up to A here to the maximum distance, the octave, then we definitely need the D here in the tenor. Now these are very far apart, and I will not be able to play that all at once in my left hand, but this is not supposed to be a keyboard style, it's not supposed to be played on the keyboard. I just demonstrate this here, but this genre is supposed to be sung, and it still sounds nice being sung if there is more than an octave between bass and tenor. So we have D, F, A, A. We double the fifths of the chord. We go to a 5 chord, G, B, D. We already have 2 Gs. The D is already here in the previous voice, so we keep it in the same voice. And we go up to B in the alto. G, B, D, F. We have G and the F. And so we just keep the D and the B in the voices in which they already occurred in the previous chord. And then we go to 1 C, E, G. We already have a C, we have an E. We don't want to double the E, the third of the chord. We can go down here in the tenor to C and leap down to the G, so we have C, C, E, G. We double the root of the chord. So before we go too far, let's do our error detection. We ended up here, so we'll start up here again. So we have an octave going to an octave. Okay, so we have parallel octaves, and we definitely need to avoid that. So our A chord, A, C, E, E, in this case doubled the fifth of the chord, the E. Let's see what we can do. If we were going to A, C, E doubling the root of the chord. We have to be careful with parallels. So let's just check this. We have the ninth going to a fifth. We have a sixth going to a third, and we already did this at the beginning. We have a diminished fifth going to a sixth. We have a seventh going to an octave. But here's the seventh, and F was the seventh of the chord. That was actually the reason why we wrote the E down here, because we needed to resolve the seventh down by step. So we can get rid of the parallels by writing this up, but then we don't resolve the seventh, so we